In September 2024, a 25-year-old woman in Tianjin, China, woke up and did something she hadn't done in 11 years. She ate breakfast, without injecting insulin first. No pump, no pen, no correction bolus. Her pancreas, or rather, what scientists had built to replace it, was manufacturing insulin on its own. 75 days after a single procedure, her A1C had dropped to 5.0. Not managed, not controlled, normal. That patient is now past the 1-year mark, still insulin independent. And unless you follow Chinese biomedical journals, you probably never heard about it. The question isn't whether this happened. It did. It was published in Cell, one of the most prestigious scientific journals on Earth. The question is, why isn't this available to the 1.4 million Americans living with type 1 diabetes right now? The answer involves 3 governments, 2 regulatory philosophies, a $200 billion pharmaceutical industry, and a scientific race most people don't even know is happening. Let's step back. If you or someone you love has type 1 diabetes, you already know the basics. But most people, including most doctors in general practice, confuse it with type 2. So let's be precise. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune catastrophe. Somewhere in childhood or adolescence, your immune system receives a false signal. Your T lymphocytes, the elite soldiers of your defense network, turn inward and destroy the beta cells in your pancreas, the only cells in your body that produce insulin. Once they're gone, they don't come back. This isn't about sugar. It isn't about diet. It isn't about willpower. A 5-year-old diagnosed with type 1 didn't eat too many cookies. Their immune system committed friendly fire on one of the most critical factories in their body. Since 1921, the treatment has been the same in principle. Inject the insulin your body can no longer make. First from pigs, then from bacteria engineered to produce human insulin. The delivery systems improved. Syringes became pens, pens became pumps, pumps became closed-loop systems talking to continuous glucose monitors. But the fundamental reality hasn't changed in over a century. You are the machine now. You calculate every meal, every correction, every basal rate. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for the rest of your life. The medical establishment calls this well-managed. Patients call it something else. But there's something this story doesn't tell you. For the last 15 years, laboratories on 3 continents have been quietly racing towards something that would make insulin pumps obsolete. Not better management, replacement. Giving the body back what the immune system took. And one lab may have crossed the finish line first. In late 2024, Professor Deng Hongkui and his team at Peking University published their results. A single patient, a woman with type 1 diabetes for over a decade, received a transplant of lab-grown islet cells. Not from a donor, not from a pig, from her own body. Here's what they did. They took cells from her own tissue and chemically reprogrammed them. Not genetically, chemically. Using a cocktail of small molecules, they essentially rewound the biological clock of ordinary cells, turning them back into pluripotent stem cells. Cells that could become anything. Then, they guided those cells forward again, this time into functional, insulin-producing beta cells. They clustered them into structures that mimicked pancreatic islets, and they transplanted them into her abdominal muscle wall. Think about that for a moment. They didn't give her someone else's organ. They didn't use embryonic tissue. They took her own cells, dissolved their identity, and rebuilt them as the exact cells her immune system had destroyed years ago. 75 days later, she was insulin-free. At the 1-year mark, she remained insulin-free. Her daily insulin requirement had dropped from multiple injections per day to 0. Her time-in-range glucose readings were those of someone without diabetes. Now, if you're a scientist, you already have objections. And they're valid. This is one patient. One. In medicine, a single case is an anecdote, not evidence. The follow-up period is short by regulatory standards. The long-term immune response is unknown. Whether this will work in 10 patients or 100 or 10,000, Nobody knows yet. But here's where the fracture begins. While Chinese researchers were transplanting reprogrammed cells into a living patient, the leading American program, Vertex Pharmaceuticals and their VX-880 trial, was still navigating FDA Phase 1 and 2 clinical trials. Their approach uses a different source: embryonic stem cell-derived islet cells from a donor line. It requires immunosuppression. The patient must take drugs to prevent rejection for the rest of their life. The Chinese approach, because it uses the patient's own cells, may not require immunosuppression at all. Two different philosophies, two different regulatory systems, two different timelines. And between them, 1.4 million Americans waiting. But that's not even the real story yet. To understand why a breakthrough, published in one of the world's top journals, hasn't triggered a revolution, you need to understand three separate systems operating simultaneously, and none of them are talking to each other. The first system is regulatory. The FDA operates on a framework designed for pharmaceutical drugs, molecules you can standardize, manufacture at scale, and test in controlled, double-blind trials. Cell therapies break this model. Every batch of reprogrammed cells is unique to the patient. You can't do a placebo-controlled trial the same way. You can't transplant fake cells into someone's abdomen and call it a control group. The FDA knows this. They've created expedited pathways: Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy Designation, Breakthrough Therapy Designation. Vertex's VX-880 received both. But expedited, in FDA terms, still means years. The Phase 1/2 trial for VX-880 began enrolling in 2021. As of early 2025, they were still in dose optimization with a handful of patients. In China, the regulatory pathway moved differently. The National Medical Products Administration, China's equivalent of the FDA, authorized compassionate use and investigator-initiated trials with less precedent required. Professor Deng's team was able to move from laboratory proof of concept to human transplantation faster. Now, and this is critical, faster is not automatically better. The FDA's caution exists because of real history. Real patients harmed by premature therapies. The thalidomide disaster. The gene therapy death of Jesse Gelsinger in 1999. Every month of delay represents a lesson learned in blood. But faster is also not automatically worse, and the assumption that Chinese science is inherently less rigorous is itself a bias worth examining. The second system is financial. Vertex Pharmaceuticals has invested billions in its diabetes cell therapy program. They acquired Sema Therapeutics in 2019 for $950 million, specifically for this technology. Their stock price is partially built on the promise of VX-880 and its successors, a chemically reprogrammed autologous cell therapy, one that uses the patient's own cells, threatens this model in a fundamental way. If you don't need a standardized cell line manufactured in a central facility and shipped to hospitals worldwide, you don't need a pharmaceutical company to be the gatekeeper. You need a protocol, a set of chemicals, a lab technician, and the patient's own blood draw. That's not a product, that's a procedure. And procedures don't generate the same kind of recurring revenue that patented cell lines do. Now, no one is sitting in a boardroom saying, "Suppress the Chinese research." That's not how this works. But when the entire infrastructure of drug development, regulatory approval, insurance reimbursement, and hospital adoption is built around proprietary products, a protocol-based cure doesn't fit neatly into any existing box. The third system is geopolitical. Since 2018, the United States and China have been engaged in an escalating technology competition. Semiconductor export controls, AI research restrictions. Biotech has entered this arena. In 2024, the U.S. House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party specifically flagged Chinese biotech companies as potential national security concerns. The Biosecure Act targeted companies like BGI and Wuxi AppTech. The stated reason: protecting American genetic data from foreign access. The unstated consequence: every Chinese biomedical breakthrough now passes through a filter of suspicion before it reaches American patients. Professor Deng's research has no connection to those companies. His work is academic, published openly, peer-reviewed, reproducible in principle by any lab in the world. But in a climate where Chinese biotech triggers congressional hearings, the distance between a published paper in Cell and an FDA-approved therapy in an American hospital might be measured in decades, not years. And every one of those years is a year that someone's child is still counting carbohydrates at every meal. But that's not the worst part. Here is the part of this story that should keep every American health policymaker awake at night. China is not alone. Japan's Center for iPS Cell Research, founded by Nobel laureate Shinya Yamanaka, has been developing induced pluripotent stem cell therapies for over a decade. Japan's regulatory framework, the Act on the Safety of Regenerative Medicine, was specifically designed to accelerate cell therapies. They've already approved iPS-derived treatments for macular degeneration. South Korea, Israel, Australia, all have active islet cell transplantation research programs. All operate under regulatory frameworks that can move faster than the FDA for regenerative medicine. The United States invented the science of stem cell reprogramming. Yamanaka's foundational work was done partly at the Gladstone Institutes in San Francisco. American taxpayers funded decades of the basic research through NIH grants. And now, for the first time in modern biomedical history, the United States may not be where the cure arrives first. Let me say that again. The country that funded the foundational science, that hosts the largest pharmaceutical companies, that has the most advanced hospital systems on Earth, may watch its own citizens fly to Tianjin, or Kyoto, or Seoul to receive a cell therapy that American regulators haven't yet approved. This has happened before. Medical tourism for procedures unavailable domestically is not new. But it has never happened for something this fundamental: a potential functional cure for an autoimmune disease affecting millions. And here's what makes this uniquely dangerous. When desperate patients seek unregulated versions of legitimate therapies, they become vulnerable to fraud. Stem cell clinics in Mexico, Panama, the Bahamas, many offering unproven treatments at $50,000 a session, already prey on families of children with type 1. The longer the gap between breakthrough and approved access, the wider the window for exploitation. So what happens now? Let's be honest about what we know and what we don't. What we know: chemically reprogrammed autologous stem cells can produce functional insulin in at least one human patient for over a year. This is real. This is documented. This is peer-reviewed. What we don't know: whether it works consistently across different patients, different disease durations, different immune profiles. Whether the transplanted cells survive 5 years, 10 years, a lifetime. Whether the autoimmune attack that destroyed the original beta cells will eventually target the new ones too. These are not small questions, and anyone who tells you this is a guaranteed cure is either misinformed or selling something. But here's what is happening right now, in real time. Professor Deng's team is expanding their trial. More patients, longer follow-up, rigorous documentation designed to meet international standards, including the FDA's. Vertex Pharmaceuticals is advancing VX-880 and its next-generation successor, which aims to use encapsulated cells that hide from the immune system without requiring immunosuppression drugs. Their approach, if it works, could be manufactured at scale, a standardized product available to every hospital. In Japan, clinical trials for iPS-derived islet cells are in planning stages. In Australia, researchers are developing biocompatible capsules that could protect transplanted cells from immune attack. The race is real, it's happening now, and for the first time in a century, the finish line is visible. So what can you do with this information? If you or someone you love has type 1 diabetes, here's what this changes. First, ask your endocrinologist about islet cell transplantation clinical trials. ClinicalTrials.gov lists active studies. Vertex's trial is recruiting. Other programs are opening enrollment. Second, understand the difference between legitimate clinical trials and unregulated stem cell clinics. Legitimate trials don't charge you. They're registered. They have institutional review board oversight. If someone asks for $30,000 to inject stem cells, walk away. Third, follow the science, not the headlines. A single case study is not a cure announcement, but it is a proof of concept. And in medicine, proof of concept is where everything begins. Fourth, and this matters politically, contact your congressional representatives about regenerative medicine regulatory reform. The FDA needs resources and updated frameworks to evaluate cell therapies without either reckless speed or paralyzing delay. This is not a partisan issue. Diabetes doesn't check voter registration. This isn't medical advice. It's the map. Your doctor is the navigator. Remember that woman in Tianjin? She ate breakfast without insulin, for the first time in 11 years. Not because someone gave her a better pump, not because someone optimized her basal rate, because scientists took cells from her own body and rebuilt what her immune system had destroyed. Right now, tonight, somewhere in America, a parent is setting an alarm for 2 a.m. to check their child's blood sugar. A college student is calculating carbs in a dining hall. A truck driver is pulling over because his CGM is screaming that he's at 54 milligrams per deciliter. For all of them, the question is no longer if a functional cure is possible. The question is, who gets it first, and who decides? In our next episode, we go inside the cell itself. What actually happens when a reprogrammed stem cell becomes a beta cell? How does it know what to do? And what happens when the immune system finds it? If this changed something in what you understood about type 1 diabetes, the next episode will change more. This is not medical advice. This is education. A map drawn from published science and documented evidence. For every decision about your health, your doctor is the navigator.